I'm a mental performance consultant. I work in the field of sports psychology. You go in and ask athletes, what does it take to be successful? 95% of those answers are mental.
Dealing with athletes who have injuries, what are kind of the key points that you want to hit on the psychological side of things?
A lot of athletes, after they're injured, kind of get, unfortunately, discarded from their programs. And so it's this really big contrast for a lot of athletes who just find a lot of frustration and disappointment and anger. The biggest thing for those athletes is to give them control of that.
Who are some, maybe one professional athlete that you admire their mentality?
Kobe Bryant, he is such a strong epitome of that mental resilience.
The transfer portal in college athletics, and I have seen you talk about this. What is your thoughts on the transfer portal from the mental side of things? Okay, Adaylne Fettig, before we get into your background, who you are and what you do, I think people who've clicked on this know that you are in the sports psychology world. And I selfishly have a question for you. Let's say, all right, let's go back to when I was playing football. All right. And one thing that I struggled with was sometimes I would have a slight little flicker of doubt hop in my mind when I saw a ball carrier in the open field. Okay.
Yeah.
And going to try and make an open field tackle on this ball carrier. And if that little flicker of doubt hopped into my mind at all of, oh, am I going to be able to make this tackle or not? I could never, ever make the tackle. I would always miss the tackle.
Yeah.
If I didn't have that little flicker of doubt come in my mind, I would always make the tackle. So what would you say to young Nick, who struggled sometimes with doubt in the open field tackling? What would you say? What advice would you give me?
So that flicker of doubt is really, really common, unfortunately, for a lot of athletes. But it doesn't mean that you had something necessarily fundamentally wrong with you. It's probably one of those kind of intrusive thoughts that your brain just kind of produces in the moment because it has a lack of appropriate point of focus. And so our brain's entire purpose is basically to preserve you and help you do everything you can to be successful. And so in that situation, if you are kind of anchoring your focus to anything productive or strong, you can fall into those habits of going to that more primal place of your brain of how do I protect myself? And that means that doubt coming in of, okay, is this worth it for me to make this tackle? Do I have everything capable in me to make this tackle and do it well and be safe and do it productively? And so that's why that kind of flicker pops in. And so what we need to do in those situations to make sure that doesn't happen is give you something really strong to anchor your focus in.
Okay.
And so that means basically setting, one of my favorite things in the whole world for almost all athletes is setting mini micro goals for yourself that are super, super specific and very niche to you in that moment. And so that means basically in that situation, you could have had your goal to be have strong open field tackles, and you do that by strong eyes and hitting low or whatever that might look like to you. But in that situation, you have something way more productive to be focused on rather than letting your brain kind of take the reins and pop up with those panic thoughts and doubts.
Damn it, that's good. Instead of me thinking as I'm running there, oh man, I really hope I make the tackle.
Yeah.
Strong eyes, hit low.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll tell young Nick that. Okay, that's great. It's very good advice. And I think that then is a good moment for us to then get into your backstory, why you have this expert opinion on the open field tackling, the mental side of it. What is your background and how did you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a mental performance consultant, which basically means I work in the field of sports psychology, doing everything I can to help my athletes get from where they are now to where they're trying to go through building up their headspace. I have my master's in sports psychology, and I'm a certified breathwork consultant. I work with all sorts of different athletes, mostly some older high school age, but mostly collegiate and professional athletes, supporting them getting to a place where their headspace is working for them rather than against them. And it's basically just performance enhancement support, but instead of lifting or speed work, it's just doing the same thing for your brain.
Yeah. And why did you get into this? What was the motivation for you to enter this field?
Yeah, so I did competitive gymnastics growing up, and I watched girls all around me struggle with their headspace constantly.
Right.
Like girls who were elite level gymnasts doing really, really high skill, kind of dangerous tricks
Yeah.
would one day just like not even be able to do a cartwheel or a handstand just because their brain. And it really sucked to watch like so many amazing athletes just kind of crumble to their headspace. And so it was always something that I was really curious about and like there has to be a solution to this, but I
Yeah.
didn't really know until much, much later. And I knew I really wanted to work with athletes, and I had a big passion for that all growing up. And then when I got into college, I was introduced to psychology, and I was like, there has to be something, there's got to be something there. And there was. And so I found the world of sports psychology and absolutely fell in love with it. And that kind of got the ball rolling for me from there.
I think that is so fascinating about gymnastics, and not to derail us too much, but just a
Yeah.
little bit. You remember a couple of years ago when Simone Biles was having, I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what it was, but it was like a mental
Yeah.
situation where did she lost the confidence? Do you know much about
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. She basically like lost her confidence in her capabilities, and gymnastics can be really, really dangerous, especially if you don't like trust your capabilities.
that? Yeah.
And it seemed like from what I've learned, at least like from like the public facing bit of it, she was having like those flickers of doubts you mentioned. And you like you said, you're pretty much guaranteed when those flickers of doubts come into your head and you start questioning yourself to not be successful in whatever you're attempting when you start asking yourself those types of questions. And in gymnastics, if you're asking yourself those types of questions 20 feet in the air, it's a
Yeah.
little dangerous. And so I think she wanted to give herself that like physical protection by giving herself the opportunity to not partake and give herself the room to kind of recover and recoup and find that confidence again.
Me and Simone Biles, two elite athletes,
Same, same.
same same category, struggling with our mental aspect. Uh, you know what's kind of interesting though is I feel like if I remember correctly back to that, she was getting a bunch of flack, like a
Yeah.
bunch of criticism for like, "Oh, you're not participating in the Olympics or because your mental side of things." It's like
Yeah,
if an athlete had a physical injury or something physically wrong with them, no, I mean, no one would say anything.
for
But
sure.
the mental side, it feels like so many people can't even comprehend that that's at least half of sports performance. Can you comment
Yeah.
on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bummer to see that type of reaction, but it's kind of like still the reality of the world we live in today.
Yep.
But when you go in and ask athletes what does it take to be successful in your support, 95+% of those answers are mental. It's you need to be resilient, you need to be focused, you need to be determined, you need to be motivated, you need to be this, that, and the other. And those are all mental, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously, like the physical piece plays a massive role, but so does the mental piece. And I feel like the world's still trying to catch up to that. And especially if you aren't an athlete or haven't been an athlete, you can't really comprehend that and you can't understand the amount of like mental intensity that it takes to be able to perform at a high level, and that is hard to sustain sometimes. And so people are just really quick to judge and be like, she should have just sucked it up. And it's like, well, she could have really gotten hurt. And so,
Yeah.
so maybe just give her like a little bit of grace. I feel like that's another thing that happens with high level athletes too, is people kind of forget that they're people too,
Yeah.
and put them in weird categories of it's like, no, you're here to perform for us. Like
Yeah.
you
Hey,
shouldn't have to deal with it.
entertain me. I'm watching you on
Yeah,
TV. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. And I'm getting completely derailed here, but I'm just really interested in it because you said like people can't see that's
Yeah,
kind of invisible. How do you in this sports psychology world and mental performance world, how do you measure success with clients or athletes that you work with? Because it can be, I guess, kind of hard to quantify, like
yeah.
quantifiably measure that. How do you measure success in your world?
Yeah, so success for my athletes always is an individual comparison. I think a lot of times we kind of put pressure on athletes to like perform well against others, which, yeah, that's a big part. And we all, like, all athletes want to win. I get that for sure. But a lot of that true, real success comes from competing against themselves. And so at the beginning of my work with all my athletes, I do a pretty in-depth kind of like analysis of where they are now and try and get a lot of data points of what type of athlete they are in all factors, both physically, mentally, and then a lot of their habits off the field as well. And then through our work together, we put a lot of effort into making sure we create like that sustainable, consistent growth.
Right.
And then that's how we kind of track them against themselves. It creates a lot of physical success for them as well. Because I always say, if you're in a situation where you're playing a really terrible team, and you're competing to their level and you win, but you like played down to their level, was that a great game for you? Probably not. And it's the same thing if you're playing against a great team. You're having to go through these like roller coasters of adjustment in your play, and you're not finding any consistency on your own, and you're expecting your competitor to create this level of performance for you. That's kind of lazy, and it creates unsustainable, basically, like, progress and success. And so if we could turn that inside on themselves and figure out how do we get you to grow and perform at your highest capability regardless of who you're going against, you're going to be a lot better for it down the line.
Yeah, I've seen that, and you basically, I think on the top of your website, you have eliminating the divide between potential and performance, and so like
Yeah.
for an individual athlete to maximize their personal performance regardless of the external situations or who they're
Yeah.
playing. I'll tell you what, though, myself and your husband Mitch played football together, and sometimes we played against some teams that weren't so great, and we did joke
Yeah.
about how we would sometimes stoop to their level.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
and
hard
those,
not to.
yeah, those are sometimes when I would have some of those missed tackles.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Addie, this is super interesting because it's been so prominent in the sports world's
Yeah.
news is the transfer portal in college athletics. And I have seen you talk about this.
Mhm.
And I've been critical of it for a bunch of different reasons. But what is your opinion on this and on athletes being able to just kind of hop around and, hey, oh, I'm not a starter here, let me leave? What is
Yeah.
your thoughts on the transfer portal from the mental side of things?
So it's a super nuanced subject, and I
Okay.
think that there are a lot of circumstances and environments that call for an appropriate transfer.
Mhm.
There are circumstances and situations beyond usually like the surface that
Mhm.
it makes sense for that athlete to transfer,
Yep.
but it's producing a lot of other issues, not only in like the sports world, but in athletes as they basically like retire and go on with their lives. I'm worried about that tail end of things for a lot of athletes. And that mostly comes from the basically off ramp of being able to quit something if it's not working for you really, really quickly and really, really easily. And on top of that, a cultural issue that it's creating. When you talk to most collegiate athletes, one of, if not always, their best experience and their best memories are with their other teammates. And that's where so many people create lifelong friends and people that they can really rely on for a long time after their time at that program finishes. And that's being really shattered right now, which is really disappointing to see. And then it's also creating a really hard environment for teams to find really like rooted true success and have that sustainable success as a program, because you're just moving pieces in and out. There's a concept in sports psychology around basically like changing roles and how a team changes every single time a new piece is added
Yeah.
or subtracted. And so this is happening for colleges constantly throughout the season or throughout like off seasons, and it's putting a lot of pressure on the program to produce something successful, and it's creating a lot of issues in that way. But then it's also allowing these athletes to, in certain situations when it's not necessarily like the right thing for them to transfer, it's giving them this off ramp mentally that their brain is saying, oh, I can quit this. Like it's not working for me right now. I don't have to put in a little bit of time and effort. I can just leave. And our brain is really habitual. Our brain works basically on a whole series of habits. And quitting can very easily become a habit. And so if you start allowing that to be an option for you in all circumstances of life, not just sports, your brain's going to be like, oh, that's a choice. I can quit this whenever I need. And it gets really, really dangerous for athletes.
This is a great perspective that I don't think we hear enough about when it comes to the transfer portal conversation. But I think you're right. There are, of course, like very legitimate reasons for athletes to transfer schools.
Yeah.
That's for them, of course. And that's been the case. And
yeah,
I just think the widespread nature of it now, and the fact that, okay, you look at some of these college athletes, and it's like they're all playing college at four different a different college every
yeah,
single year.
yeah,
Also, the identity thing that you touched on with, like, okay, the camaraderie that you have with your college sports team because you guys
yeah.
have been together for multiple years, that's kind of eroding. But I think
Yeah.
the quitting habit is a great one because you're seeing it now with a lot of like big time football programs, of guys, if they come in and they're not starting immediately, hey, I'm out. I'm going somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Instead of
Yeah.
trying to stay and
Yeah.
earn that starting spot. So, okay, good. Every show I like to bash the transfer portal situation. You're also big in the breathwork worlds and using breathing
Yeah.
to help athletes and people reach their highest potential. Can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe, okay, let's say I'm about to play a football game and I'm really nervous. Okay. And what would you have me do?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
So, breathing is one of the simplest and most effective tools we have at our disposal. It's
Yeah.
something we do all the time, obviously, but it's not something we always focus on.
Yeah.
And it's something that can really support our performance and our nervous system and our focus. And if we utilize it, it can put us in a much better position to perform at a really high capability. And so it's something that can be done constantly. It's something I have my athletes do throughout games and performances because it is so easy and it's so simple. And learning to control that can make a really huge impact on how you're dealing with tough challenges and how you're regulating and actually like even your endurance.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I think is very underutilized and very simple that all athletes can kind of take into their own routines. Heading into games with like a high level of nerves is super common.
Yeah.
And everybody reacts differently to breathing, and there's different structures that can kind of support different things for different athletes. But one that I always encourage athletes to do heading into games is basically like it's a nose plug walk.
Okay. Okay.
where where heading into a game, what we want to do is basically open up your lungs. Most of us, our lungs are kind of like shaped like this, and most of us are only using like the top third of our lungs.
Yeah.
And it's just mechanically how we breathe. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but the majority of our lungs is at the bottom, and that's where a lot of our basically like lung capacity sits, and it goes really unused and ignored. And so this helps warm all of that up and gets those vessels kind of kicked in and us ready to go. And it puts us at a little bit more of a balanced blood oxygen level and gives us the opportunity to take in more CO2. Usually, as athletes, when we're physically tired, it feels like you need more oxygen, right? That's not the truth. We need less CO2, which is what we are like storing in our body. And so this puts us at a more balanced level. And when we're feeling those nerves and that like stress level kind of rise, usually what we'll see is like heart rate levels increase, our breathing starts to speed up, we start feeling like a little more jittery. And so we need to kind of down regulate, bring that blood oxygen level back to a good level. And so one of my favorite things, like I said, is that nose plug walk. So you'll stand up, take a few breaths, just regularly get your blood or your oxygen levels feeling like at their normal stable level. Plug your nose, hold your breath, walk until you feel like you need air. Stop walking,
Okay.
let go of your nose, keep your mouth closed, start breathing through your nose. When you feel normal again, do it again. Plug your nose, keep your mouth closed, hold your breath, walk, stop. It's super simple, it's super easy, but it does a lot of really good things for not only your endurance and your physical capability throughout the game, but it also brings you back to a really strong level physical and mental headspace so
Right.
that you can go into the game feeling a lot more physically and mentally prepared.
Okay, I like that. The nose plug walk. I am gonna try that if I'm feeling nervous or anxious for something. Okay. I also want to touch on this. Dealing with athletes who have injuries,
Yeah.
because this is a huge aspect of sports. How do you work with an athlete when coming back from injury, and what are kind of the key points that you want to hit on this psychological side of thing for having them come back, like work through the physical rehabilitation, and then coming back to the field or the court or whatever sport they may play, with confidence?
Yeah. So injuries are something, unfortunately, I deal with a lot.
Mhm.
It is the worst part of sports. They suck. There's no like sugarcoating it. It's a tough experience to go through. But there are basically two roads athletes can go on when they face an injury. The first is they can kind of like let that injury define them, impact their confidence, and as they come back from their sport, you can tell that they've been injured. They'll come back, or maybe they won't come back and they just won't be the same. Or they can use that time to work on things and grow in different ways that they usually don't have time for and come back stronger than they were before. And that is always the path my goal is for my athletes to be on. And a big piece of that is finding control through their injury recovery.
Right.
Injury is something that feels like it strips athletes of their control completely. Like they feel so helpless. They feel like they're in the passenger seat of this road and journey, and it just depletes them of their confidence and their trust in their abilities, and it feeds a lot of doubt into their brain, especially because a lot of athletes after they're injured kind of get unfortunately like discarded from their programs, and it's like, okay, see you when you're healthy.
Yeah.
And so their schedules are completely ripped from them. Their schedules, even if they do have a little bit of schedule still in place, they look totally different, and they're faced in this situation where their whole life, whenever they've been healthy, they've been told, okay, this is what it means to be productive. Like you have to be training and lifting and doing all these very, very physical things. Otherwise, you're not growing and you're not getting better. And then you're injured, and progress and being productive looks like you being able to take your first steps after surgery, or like you being able to get like massages or treatment or resting fully. And so it's this really big stark contrast for a lot of athletes who just find a lot of frustration and disappointment and anger and a lot of loneliness through that process. And so the biggest thing for those athletes is to give them control of that back. It looks like creating a different view of that progress and a different view of that productivity. And so finding a routine for them that really works and helping them celebrate all of the milestones. Because what I see a lot too is athletes are injured and they're fresh off injury, and then their whole goal is, how do I get back to being a full 100%? How do I get back to where I was? And there's all this room between here and there, and that road feels big and scary, and it's like they're looking up this whole mountain and they're like, I can't do this. Like this is going to be take forever. It's going to be so hard, and they lose motivation and get to really difficult places. So to find that control, we want to pull them back to like the step in front of them. What are you working on today? What are you trying to accomplish this week? What is your next milestone we're aiming for? And then fill in the blanks. How do we get you there? So what are things mentally, physically, recovery wise that you can be doing every single day? And that puts them in a position where they feel a lot more control because they have a big list of things that they can be doing constantly. They're in control of where they put those mile markers basically, and how they spend their time. And so they feel a lot more productive in that progress, and they feel like they're actually moving towards something. And then while they're keeping track of those things, it actually puts them in a much more confident headspace because they're like, okay, I actually am getting better. I actually am seeing the progress I want to see. And so they're trusting their ability to grow and get better. And so we see if they do this consistently through their recovery, as they get back on the field and as they start ramping up, it's so much smoother for them.
Man, that's a great point, because just kind of like reframing the situation. Because I remember like being injured when playing football or playing any sport, really, it's just like then your days look so much different. And even
Yeah.
when you are, and this is something that I really struggled with, is like, okay, technically I am being productive and doing everything I can with my rehab. I'm going to, training, physio, and
Yeah.
doctor and stuff, but it looks so much different than when I'm
Yeah.
lifting weights or running sprints and going to practice and playing in games. That it's just almost like a shocking difference to where it's
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
unless maybe somebody who has experience or externally can tell you, hey, no, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be. You're being productive in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, injuries are just gosh,
They
the
suck.
worst.
They
I
suck.
think it's a good way to think about it though, that it's just like, oh, it's part of the sport, and it's like
Yep.
you're not, knock on wood, not to curse anybody, but you're probably gonna get injured at some
Yeah.
points in your sports career if you play long enough, and to
Yeah.
look at it, it's like, yep, it's just a speed bump in the
Yeah.
athletic world, right?
Yeah. And that's what we don't want, is for athletes to be playing not to get injured. That's a really dangerous game to have like your whole goal to not be injured, because
Yeah.
that's, frankly, there's things you can do, but a lot of it's outside of your control. And then what I see too is athletes getting more prone to injuries when they're playing that way, because their whole focus is on not getting injured, and they're putting themselves in a position where they're playing maybe a little more like soft or like tender or like scared because they don't want to get hurt, and then they are getting hurt because like when you go in and make a tackle and you're like, I don't want to get hurt, you're
Yeah.
gonna like take that hit a lot harder than if you go in like excited to go take that hit.
I know this all too well because the year that you guys were in Trebuchet in 2022, and I tore my MCL, and
Hmm.
what happened was I had a little tweak in my knee earlier in the week, nothing serious, but it was something that I was thinking about. And
Yeah.
then there was a fumble on the ground, and I decided, I like hesitated a second. Am I going to dive in there and risk hurting my knee? No, I'm not. So I kind of eased up a little bit, and then
Yeah.
somebody came and rolled up on me and hurt the exact knee that I was worried about getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's like that
Yeah.
hesitation and kind of that worry.
Yeah.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
A little
yeah.
bit.
Yeah, that is a very tough thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Eddie, who are some, or doesn't have to be some, but maybe one professional athlete, like well-known athlete, that you admire their mentality when it comes to sports?
Yeah, I feel like this is a gimme question. Just with Kobe Bryant, I feel like he is such a strong epitome of like that mental resilience and that mental fortitude. And he's someone who I feel like so many people look up to, and so many athletes like really resonate with his intensity and the legacy he left for not only basketball players but basically the entire sports world. And I think his like Mamba mentality is a perfect demonstration of how someone's headspace can have such a strong impact on their physical performance and their identity as an athlete. And I think he's such a good example of the power of your mind.
Yeah, I love that. I also think it's like interesting, and maybe this is just me personally, but some of the athletes that we admire so much it's not necessarily the athletes that are the most physically gifted, out of this world physically gifted, but the people that have like these type of mentalities. When I look at
Yeah.
some of my other, like Michael Jordan or Tom
Yeah.
Brady. Tom Brady, not necessarily the most physically gifted, but mentally just a
Yeah.
killer. Michael
Yeah.
Jordan is same type of thing. And so I don't know. I wonder if it's something that maybe we can just relate to more. Like if I see an athlete that has physical capabilities that I would never have, it's like, okay, I can't really do that. But if you
Yeah.
see someone who's mastered their mind,
Yeah.
somehow, like technically we could all kind of get to that point. Oh, that's a question I had for you.
100%.
Have you, okay, experienced, are there people who are, and this, are there people who are better at or more talented at improving their mental aspect of their performance, just as there are in the physical world, in the mind? Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. So your headspace, pretty much like anything else, is a skill that can be improved
Okay.
or something that cannot be improved. And there are some athletes who naturally start at maybe like a stronger level of their ability to control their mind, and most of the time what I see is it's not necessarily where an athlete starts, but it's kind of like same thing physically. It's the effort and intensity they put into building that skill.
Right.
And so when I see athletes who are like better at like growing their headspace, it's the ones who are the most consistent. Headspace is something that kind of doesn't lie. It's very like black and white and very manageable and controllable and attainable for everybody, which I think is why it's something so powerful, because they're like, frankly, with physical capabilities, there are some things some athletes just won't ever be able to do. Like there are just like natural physical gifts that some are blessed with and some are not. Our headspace is something that we all start on different like starting points, but I think we can all get to the same level of control and moderation over our mindset. And it's something that as long as you put in that consistent work and you have a lot of intensity and intentionality behind it,
Yeah.
you can get there. And so it's not necessarily some are better, some are just better at showing up for it.
Okay. All right. Nice. You work both with individual athletes and with teams,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
How does this differ? What is kind of the biggest differences, and what are your focuses when focusing with just an individual and then having to deal with an entire team?
Yeah. So there are a lot of big differences with those two. Some of my favorite work can be done with individuals because our headspaces, like I just said, like we are all so different. We all start at very different places and we all need very, very different things. Something I tell my athletes constantly is our work, it will always be tailored to them. And I am avidly against like bumper sticker slogan support. I'm not gonna give you like one liners that hype you up. I might, but like that those aren't where we see fundamental changes. It's actual like tangible tactical approaches to making those differences. And that's where you can kind of get in like the nitty gritty with those athletes when it's one-on-one. However, I think there's a lot of value in teamwork as well, because you can get a lot of information to a lot of people really quickly. But what happens then is, let's say I introduce breathing to the
Yeah.
group and I tell everybody to do that, like nose plug walk. And the majority of the team does it and they like find good balance with it and it works for them. But then there's one athlete who is like, this makes me feel like more alert and more stressed heading into the game. I need something different.
Yeah.
That's where it's really important to be able to check in with those athletes individually and find something that works more effectively for them. When I'm working with teams, I really have to generalize and give them more broad strokes of what's going to be supportive and helpful. And a lot of times I'm hearing from like coaches what they're seeing and kind of identifying what the team needs in that situation. Whereas when I'm working with individuals, I can figure it out myself, which
That's interesting. How is it working with coaches of teams to then kind of cater what you're doing for athletes?
yeah, I think all coaches are very different. I think that they all have like their own perception and own understanding of what headspace means.
Yeah.
And so it's always my favorite to be able to sit down with that coach before I meet with the team and kind of figure out, okay, I do basically like an individual session with them first and kind of assess like where are you, where's your headspace at, and what is your perception of my work and where the team's at. And so I kind of do some quick analysis to try and figure out where they're coming from so that I can best pull information from them and use it to best support the team. So when working with the coaches, a lot of times I'll hear like, we're having like culture problem responsibility. And it's like, okay, now that I have that piece of information from you, I need to figure out what specifically that means, because that's a very like broad statement. And a lot of times I'll get more examples from them, but those examples and those experiences can be a little biased sometimes. And they're so close to the team and they're upfront and personal with it. So of course those biases are going to come in. And so it's really important for me to be able to kind of identify those biases as best as I can and really figure out what those like cultural or problems that he's trying to describe actually look like, so I can come in and make a substantial difference.
Interesting. Okay. So if you have like a cultural problem with the team, if a coach says this, like how, I mean, how do you go about trying to improve that from the psychology? Do you single out individual players who you think might be leaders, or how does it work?
Yeah, so cultural problems always come with a whole bunch of extra nuances and a whole bunch of like I feel like they're a domino
Yeah.
effect kind of thing. When I hear a coach say like we have a culture problem, it's like, okay, like I got to go get my hands dirty on this one a
Yeah.
little bit. And a lot of times, what I like to do is talk to those leaders of the team and kind of get an understanding of who not only are the like elected leaders, like who the coaches chose, but who are those like social leaders
Right.
and who are the guys who maybe aren't given like captain titles or whatever, but they're the guys who are in charge of other groups of guys and who people respond to as leaders. And from there, I can kind of delegate a little bit. Like if I can train them and get them to a place where they know what to be looking for and they know how to be supporting their teammates the best they can, I can give them that information and then they can go out into practices and games and embody that. And that's where we see really strong lasting change because it's all good and well for someone to come in and be like, okay, like let's work on your culture.
Yeah.
But if there's not like plants and people part of that culture really making those changes, it's there's not going to be anything that actually switches.
That is fascinating. That must be like just a interesting problem to try to solve. I mean,
It's a
just
lot of
like
fun.
trying to set a culture or help improve a culture of a team.
Yeah.
Okay, Addie, last question. And again, this might be very stupid, but I just curious. So, like, we've seen developments in how we train physically uh,
Hmm.
over the years in sports, and there's like certain things that okay, athletes would do in the '80s where we look back and it's like, I can't believe we did that. No.
Yeah.
Is there anything like that in the mental side of things where we look back at like how athletes? I mean, I feel like the psychology aspect of sports has really developed more recently. But is there anything you look back to and it's like, okay, it should probably avoid this kind of stuff in sports?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So sports psychology as like a concept is and like a practice is newer, but
Yeah,
in functionality it's not. Like
right,
athletes who had been dealing with their headspace since sports has existed.
right,
And when we kind of go back in time a little bit, and still there's some coaches and athletes who kind of like live by this motto or mindset, the concept of like white knuckling through things and like sucking it up through stuff is still like painfully common and something that I
right,
feel like hopefully we can continue to move away from. It's not a bad thing to like push through difficult things, but a
right,
lot of times when we say like white knuckle through it, it's like go figure it out on your own and fix this by yourself. And that often leads to athletes kind of running into like brick walls of their problems and finding a really unfortunate plateau and not being able to grow past a certain point, and really stunting their own personal growth. And so instead of like theoretically like white knuckling through something, the most effective thing athletes can do to overcome these problems or get through difficult situations, I think, is actually taking a step back and giving themselves the opportunity to review
right,
and check in on how they want to be growing and how they want to be progressing through this. Because when we are trying to like persevere through something, if we are just like a bull running through it and just trying to like break that brick wall with just like might and no thought behind it, it, it usually doesn't work because when we're in the thick of something and emotions are involved and we're committed to it, kind of like the logic centers of our brain start to shut off and we're just kind of acting.
yeah,
And so we see repeat mistakes over and over and over and over again. And that's why sometimes you'll see an athlete like, let's say, drop a pass and then be like, I gotta go fix it, and then like try to go get it back and then make a worse mistake. um, and that's that kind of like white knuckle through it mentality. And instead of that, if the athlete would have come off the field and been like, okay, how do I fix this? What did I do wrong? And how do I fix that for next time and get really, really specific, not to just like, okay, catch the ball next time. Like,
right.
no, what does that look like for you to have caught that ball in that situation? We see such a drastic improvement in their capability. And odds are the next time they're in that situation, they catch that ball and their next play is going to be a lot stronger than their original play because they've given themselves the opportunity to reflect, review, given them those strong points of focus to be looking for rather than letting their brain just kind of panic mode and go try again.
Yeah. I also love when something like that happens. Like say that example that you said with if a player catches a ball. I love when a coach embraces kind of the psychology and the mental aspect of thing and comes
Yeah,
right back to that player with maybe an easy little screen pass and be like, hey,
for sure.
get you your confidence back right here.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
last thing, Addie, if you could leave people with one thing, one mental skill that is important in this world, what would it be?
I would have to say what we kind of talked at the beginning about, which is those little daily goals. So, heading into any practice or any performance, decide how you want to show up. What's one specific thing you want to accomplish? How do you want to look that day? What do you want to do? Something that's fully within your control and something that is like positive. So, don't say like, don't mess up today. And then figure out how do I do that. So get specific. What are the nitty gritties? What are the details behind that to be able to accomplish that? And so like let's say you want to work on showing up as a leader in practice today, that's your goal. Your hows would be good communication and supporting your teammates. That is one of the most simple implementations of mental skills we see, but it creates a drastic shift in performance. It puts you in this pursuit headspace, and so you're constantly striving for something through a practice, through a game, and so you don't have that space for those like flickers of doubt. You don't have that room for pulling back or playing fearfully. You're trying to accomplish something, and so you have your foot on the gas in the most productive way possible, and it really builds confidence. It really manages your focus. It helps you with your motivation going forward. It does a lot of really good things, and it's really, really simple.
Pursuit headspace instead of doubt headspace. I like that.
Exactly.
Okay. That's what I needed back when I was trying to make tackles. Addie Fettig, thank you so much for being on the show. That was fascinating. Okay.
Absolutely. I'm glad we got to talk.
All right. Thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time.